Before the first god dared to breathe, before destiny learned to speak, a force older than time itself stirred, and the universe trembled, knowing that power had opened its eyes. In that endless darkness, creation waited, silent, breathless, as if the cosmos itself feared what would awaken next. For from the heart of nothingness, a storm was gathering, a storm that would rewrite the fate of gods, titans, and the world yet to be born. Before Zeus ever lifted his thunderbolt, the world trembled under the rule of the Titans, giants so ancient and powerful that even the sky bowed before them. But their fall was coming, a fall that would shatter the old world and awaken the rise of a new king. Before the mountains, before the seas, before even the sky had a name, there was only chaos, a yawning emptiness, dark and infinite, where possibility and ruin danced together in silence. From this void rose Gaia, the earth herself, her breath the soil, her tears the rivers. From her womb poured Uranus, the starry sky, stretching forever above, and with him, the first whispers of life, storms, and ambition. Time was not yet measured, and yet the world began to stir. Titans were born, immense, slow-moving, violent as the winds that would one day batter Olympus. There was Cronus, the cruel and cunning, whose hands would shape the first prophecy, that he would be overthrown by his own child. And there was Rhea, silent, tender, a heart beating quietly against the cruelty of fate. Chaos watched, unblinking, as the universe learned its first lesson. Power comes with fear, and love is always a gamble. Stars collided, oceans rose, mountains split, and from these fractures poured the first sparks of fire, of ambition, of divine wrath. The Titans ruled, and yet even their reign was fragile. For from their power emerged a shadow, a rumor whispered by the winds. One day, a child would rise, a storm in flesh, who would not bow, who would challenge the sky itself. And in this whisper was the seed of war, the inevitability of change. From the darkness, from the first breath of life and death entwined, the world waited. And the gods, though unnamed, began their long march toward the throne of eternity. The air trembled with possibility. And somewhere, in the hidden corners of the earth, the first stars blinked in silent prophecy. A new age was coming. Cronus, the youngest of Gaia and Uranus' children, ruled the Titans with an iron fist and a heart sharpened by fear. He had learned the first and cruelest truth. Power is fleeting, and betrayal is born even in the arms of love. For Cronus had devoured his own children, each one swallowed whole, each one a promise of prophecy he dared not see fulfilled. Rhea, mother of the swallowed, wept in silence. Her grief carved rivers across the world. And yet, her love was not extinguished. When she bore Zeus, she made a plan of quiet rebellion. She gave him to the nymphs, wrapped in secrecy, hidden beneath the whispering forests and the roaring rivers. Cronus, deceived, swallowed a stone in its place, cold, unyielding, yet powerless against what had been set into motion. Zeus grew in secret, nurtured by the earth, taught by the whispers of rivers and the songs of the wind. He learned the languages of creatures, the cunning of men, and the patience of the stars. In the shadow of the Titans, he became the child of inevitability, a storm gathering silently, waiting for the hour of reckoning. And when the time came, he struck. Cronus, drunk on his certainty, was undone by his own fear. The siblings, long imprisoned in the Titan's belly, emerged, freed by Zeus' cleverness, a cascade of power long denied. Thunder shook the heavens. The earth trembled. The Titans, unprepared for the fury of what they had sought to prevent, were cast into the abyss of Tartarus, a prison of eternal darkness where even time dared not enter. From this violence, from the chaos of betrayal and liberation, Olympus rose. 12 thrones were carved in gold and marble. But even in their splendor, the new order bore the weight of mortality, ambition, and desire. The gods, though divine, were not perfect. They were reflections of human nature magnified, a mirror held high for mortals and immortals alike. Zeus, crowned by lightning and law, ruled the sky with a thunderbolt in hand. Hera, his sister and queen, watched with suspicion, her love laced with wrath. Poseidon claimed the sea, wild and untamable. Hades took the shadowed underworld, silent, immovable, yet absolute. Each god, each throne, a note in a symphony of power that would echo through time. Yet even as Olympus glittered, the world below pulsed with stories still untold. Mortal hearts beat, heroes would rise, and the first whispers of legend began to stir in the forests, the seas, and the winds. Fate, the unseen hand, spun her threads, and all awaited the arrival of the first demigods, born of mortal and god alike, who would shape the age to come. The stage was set. The players, divine and mortal, would soon step forward. And the world, trembling between chaos and order, waited for the first story to be written in blood, in fire, and in song. Olympus rose from the bones of war, a mountain crowned not by snow but by destiny. Its peaks shimmered with dawn fire, its halls forged from the breath of creation itself. No mortal foot could tread upon it without trembling. No immortal could climb it without confronting who they truly were. The gods were young then, newly crowned, newly freed, newly burdened by the weight of a world waiting to be shaped. And like all new rulers, they carried both brilliance and flaws. Zeus, sovereign of the skies, walked with thunder trailing behind him like a loyal hound. His voice could steady seas or split mountains. Yet even he, king of gods, felt the unease of command. For lightning does not simply strike, it must choose where. Hera, queen of the heavens, watched him with a gaze that pierced the marble of Olympus itself. Her love was fierce, yet her wounds were unspoken. She knew already that immortality did not protect one from hurt. It merely prolonged it. Poseidon, restless lord of the oceans, shaped storms the way other beings shaped thoughts. His moods changed the geography of coastlines. He admired Zeus, but in the silent chambers of his heart, waves of rivalry churned. Hades, ruler of the unseen realm, withdrew into shadows not out of bitterness, but clarity. He knew death was inevitable, pure, uncorrupted by politics. Mortals feared him. Yet he, paradoxically, was the god who lied the least, deceived the least, and cared the most for the balance of existence. And around them, a dozen lesser gods danced in constellation. Artemis, Apollo, Hermes, Demeter, Athena, each a spark waiting to become a flame. For a time, Olympus glittered with hope. But power, like fire, never rests. It came quietly, not through war, but through whispers. The gods, still young, discovered that mortals prayed to them with voices trembling like leaves in the wind. They discovered offerings, milk, wine, blood, placed on stone altars beneath the moon. And most dangerously of all, they discovered that offering fed them, strengthened them, shaped them. With every prayer, a god grew brighter. With every forgotten name, God dimmed. Jealousy flickered. Rivalry shifted. Alliances formed beneath starlight. Olympus had been built upon victory, but now it would be tested by a subtler war, the war for devotion. Mortals looked upward with hope. Gods looked downward with hunger. And in the quiet places of the world, far from Olympus' marble halls, a prophecy began to stir again, one that spoke of children born from gods and mortals. Children who would inherit the strengths of both and the weaknesses of neither. Children who would be heroes. Children who would spark chaos. Children who might one day challenge the gods themselves. The fates smiled as they wove the first threads. For the age of demigods was about to begin. And with it, a truth the gods feared most. Power is never safe, not even in immortal hands. Before Olympus could rest, the world below trembled with promise and danger. From the shadowed valleys and sun-drenched plains, children of gods and mortals were born, demigods, each carrying a fragment of heaven and a weight of the earth. Their births were not quiet. The stars themselves shifted. Winds whispered omens, rivers swelled with unseen power, and the earth sometimes cracked beneath the feet of the unsuspecting. Born from Zeus' cunning, Heracles entered the world in a night spun from trickery. His mother, Alcmene, did not know the full breadth of fate. Zeus had cloaked himself as her husband, stretching a single night into two. And in that night, the mortal and divine intertwined. Hera, queen of the gods and relentless in wrath, sent serpents to the cradle, but the infant crushed them with bare hands, strength already defying destiny. Each breath of his early life sang of struggle, each cry a prelude to legend. Another thread, golden and dangerous, spun in a bronze tower. Danae, his mother, imprisoned by fear and prophecy, bore him in secret. Zeus descended as a shower of gold, and from that light Perseus emerged, destined to face Medusa. to rescue Andromeda, to weave courage into the tapestry of mankind. Even as a child, he carried the weight of prophecy like a sword at his back. The gods watched, not always benevolent, often capricious. They tested, tempted, and taught through trials. For the demigods were mirrors, reflecting divine will, mortal endurance, and the fragile boundary between them. Heracles wrestled with beasts, each more monstrous than the last. The Nemean lion, whose fur could pierce no blade. The Lernaean hydra, a puzzle of death itself. Perseus navigated riddles and shadows, learning that cleverness could outshine raw power, that courage alone could conquer fear. Even the land itself conspired with fate. The winds carried secrets, the seas hid monsters, and the mountains held riddles in stone. Heroes learned, sometimes painfully, that the world of mortals was a crucible forged by the gods, and survival demanded more than strength. It demanded wit, courage, and endurance. Above, the gods watched these children rise with awe and apprehension. Zeus, though mighty, feared the prophecy that one day a child might rise to challenge him. Hera, for all her fury, observed lessons in justice and vengeance. Athena, ever the strategist, whispered guidance into the dreams of the clever, teaching that wisdom could bend destiny as surely as a sword could cut it. And yet, it was not only power or prophecy that shaped these heroes. The world itself pressed against them. Love, loss, betrayal, and hope carved the first notches into their hearts. For it is not in victory alone that legends are born, but in the struggle to endure, to rise, to shine amidst chaos. The threads of the demigod stories began to weave together, a tapestry larger than Olympus itself. And as the first heroes took their steps upon the earth, the gods felt a tremor not in the mountains, but in the course of fate itself. For every child of God and mortal, every demigod, carries both the spark of divinity and the shadow of mortality. And in that spark, the world will burn brighter than Olympus has ever known. The mountains trembled not with storms, but with the laughter of a new god. Dionysus, twice born, walked the earth not from a throne of gold, but from shadows and whispers. His birth was a miracle and a madness, drawn from the ashes of a mortal mother, sown into Zeus himself, and reborn in a world unready for his wild freedom. He did not come quietly. Where he went, rivers turned sweet with wine, vines spiraled toward the sun, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with music no mortal instrument could replicate. Birds danced in his wake. Deer ran beside him as if touched by a secret joy. Men and women felt something deep within them awaken, a longing for release, for madness, for beauty unrestrained. Dionysus was no ordinary god. He was the line drawn between the ordered world of Olympus and the untamed wilderness of the earth. In city squares, kings mocked him. Priests refused his rites. But in secret groves and hidden caves, he gathered followers who surrendered to his rhythm, who trusted in the ecstasy of life and the inevitability of chaos. The young god taught that joy and terror were twin currents of the same river. In wine, men found courage. In revelry, truths were revealed. And sometimes, the intoxication brought madness, visions of past lives, of futures unseen, of the thin veil between mortal and divine. Those who followed him knew fear, but they also knew the liberation of being alive in its most vivid form. Even kings felt the sweep of his power. In the land of thieves, the rigid monarch Perseus imprisoned Dionysus, mocking the wild rites of the god. But Dionysus, with a smile playing like sunlight on water, lured the king into a forest of shadows. There, in the dance of divine madness, Perseus' mother, Agave, unknowingly enacted the god's will, tearing her own son limb from limb. Only when the spell broke. The lesson was written across the land. Divine ecstasy is both creation and destruction, joy and terror, freedom and consequence. Dionysus wandered across mountains and seas, from the caves of India to the vineyards of Nyssa. He moved between mortals and immortals with ease. Apollo, radiant and precise, observed him from afar. Athena, wise and calculating, studied the god of liberation with wary fascination. Even Zeus could not fully command him. Dionysus belonged equally to the earth, the skies, and the secret heartbeats of mortals. Through him came the mysteries, the rites of initiation, the sacred festivals where masks and stories merged. where death and rebirth were enacted in secret. His presence taught humanity that divinity was not only above, in the halls of Olympus, but within, in the heart that dared to feel fully, to sing, to dance, to lose itself and find itself anew. And yet, even in his beauty, there was danger. The line between joy and madness was thin. The mortal who followed Dionysus too closely could forget the world entirely. Cities could collapse under the weight of ecstasy. Laws could unravel, kings could fall, and men would see the divine reflected not in temples, but in their own wild, trembling hearts. Dionysus' path intertwined with the threads of Heracles, Perseus, and the other demigods. Wherever they walked, fate followed, but Dionysus reminded all that fate was not only law and punishment. Fate was also music, dance, and the thrill of living against the current. The god of ecstasy and chaos, the twice-born wanderer, was a living contradiction. He was life and death, freedom and terror, laughter and grief. He was proof that the world of gods and men was not static, that Olympus, for all its order, would always tremble before the wild, ungovernable pulse of creation itself. And so the stage of the world widened, the threads of myth wove more tightly, and the first true clash of divine will and mortal courage began to stir. From the shadow of Olympus descended a mortal, yet one kissed by the divine, Heracles, son of Zeus and Alcmene, born of trickery, destined for pain, and sculpted by fate into legend. The stars themselves seemed to watch his birth, whispering warnings that even gods could not ignore. Hera's fury shadowed his cradle, but strength, stubborn and unyielding, coursed through his infant veins. Serpents sent to kill him were met with his tiny, unshakable hands and crushed. Heracles' youth was a prelude to suffering. The hand of madness, sent by Hera, brought catastrophe. His own family destroyed in a blinding rage. Grief-stricken, broken, yet unbowed, he sought purification at the oracle of Delphi. The Pythias spoke in riddles, as all truth comes to mortals. 12 labors awaited him, each a torment, each a trial not only of strength but of endurance, courage, and the limits of the human soul. And so the oracle spoke, 12 trials awaited Heracles, 12 wounds upon his soul, 12 steps toward immortality. The first labor, the Nemean lion. The first labor rose from the wild heart of the earth. A monstrous lion, its hide unbroken by any mortal weapon, roared like thunder across the hills of Nemea. Heracles met it with nothing but his bare hands, wrestling the beast in a clash of strength and destiny, until the golden monster fell, conquered by sheer, unyielding will. The second labor, the Lernaean Hydra. From the poisonous swamps of Lerna came the second labor, a serpent of many heads, each one reborn the moment it was struck down. Heracles fought not only with courage, but with cleverness, cauterizing each neck as it fell, turning a creature of endless multiplication into a defeated nightmare, sinking into the waters that birthed it. The third labor, the Ceryneian hind. The third labor demanded patience rather than violence. A sacred deer of Artemis, swift as moonlight and untouchable by mortal hands. For an entire year, Heracles pursued it across mountains and forests, not to slay it, but to capture it without shedding a single drop of divine blood. The fourth labor, the Erymanthian boar. The fourth labor thundered from icy peaks, a boar of monstrous size, raging through the snows like living fury. Heracles chased it into the wilderness, cornered it, and bound it alive, proof that even unrestrained chaos could be brought to its knees. The fifth labor, the Augean stables. The fifth labor tested not strength but strategy. King Augeas' stables, untouched for decades, filled with filth no mortal could move. But Heracles bent rivers to his will, carving a path through stone, and cleansing the impossible in a single day by the genius of his mind. The sixth labor, the Stymphalian birds. The sixth labor shrieked from the skies, metal-feathered birds whose wings cut through air like razors, raining death on all below. Heracles drove them out with invention and accuracy, loosing arrows that split the very shadows of their wings. The seventh labor, the Cretan bull. The seventh labor came from the island of kings. Poseidon's furious bull, wild and unstoppable, tore the land beneath its hooves. Heracles seized it by force alone, wrestling it into submission, as the sea winds watched in awe. The eighth labor, the Mares of Diomedes. The eighth labor was darker still. Man-eating Mars, trained for cruelty by the warlord Diomedes. Heracles overpowered the tyrant, calmed the beasts, and led them away, turning savagery into surrender. The ninth labor, the girdle of Hippolyta. The ninth labor crossed into Amazonian lands. Queen Hippolyta, mighty and wise, offered her girdle as a gift. Yet Hera's deceit turned peace into battle. Heracles fought through tragedy and misunderstanding to claim the prize and continue his journey. The 10th labor, the cattle of Geryon. The 10th labor stretched to the edge of the world. Geryon, a giant with 3 bodies and the strength of a small army, stood guard. Heracles crossed burning deserts, storm-torn seas, and fought through impossible lands to bring the sacred cattle home. The 11th labor, the golden apples of the Hesperides. The 11th labor shimmered with divine mystery. Golden apples guarded by the Hesperides and the dragon laden. Heracles sought wisdom from gods and titans, tricked Atlas himself, and returned with the fruit of immortality, not by brute force, but by cunning worthy of Olympus. The 12th labor, the capture of Cerberus. The final labor plunged into the heart of death. Cerberus, the 3-headed guardian of the underworld. Unyielding, eternal, terrifying, Heracles descended without fear, wrestled the beast without weapon or armor, and returned alive, proving not victory over death, but respect for the boundaries even gods cannot break. Each labor was a brushstroke of a mortal painted against the divine canvas. Through them, Heracles became more than man. He became the embodiment of perseverance, of courage honed by grief, a mortality elevated by the gods. Even Hera, whose wrath had shadowed him from birth, finally relented. Upon his death, poisoned by a robe soaked in the blood of a treacherous centaur, Heracles ascended. The funeral pyre was his bridge from earth to Olympus. In that flame, agony and glory merged. He became the only mortal to claim a seat among gods. Strength was not enough. Only suffering, endurance, and choice could forge a hero worthy of immortality. Cities, mountains, and rivers remembered him. His deeds were sung in every temple, carved into every monument, whispered in every hearth. Heroes who followed his lineage, Perseus, Atalanta, Bellerophon, walked paths shaped by his shadow. Fate had not been denied. It had been confronted, endured, and transformed into legend. And through Heracles, mortals glimpsed the truth of the divine. The gods could inspire, intervene, and bless, but they could not bear the weight of suffering as men could. In the endurance of one mortal, Olympus itself found reflection, humility, and awe. Before Perseus ever drew breath, fate had already drawn its net around him. His story began not with a cry, but with a prophecy spoken in a shadowed hall, where an oracle whispered that King Acrisius would one day fall by the hand of his daughter's son. Fear makes tyrants of ordinary men, and so Danae, his daughter, was locked away in a bronze chamber where neither sun nor hope could enter. But fate does not bow to metal, and Zeus does not bow to fear. In a rain of burning gold, the king of the heavens descended, not as a conqueror, but as shimmering divinity. From that impossible union came Perseus, born into a world afraid of his very existence. Acrisius, trembling at destiny, placed mother and child into a wooden chest and cast them into the open sea. But the waves themselves seemed to cradle them. For nothing born of prophecy perishes so easily. They washed ashore on the island of Seriphos, where a fisherman named Dictys brought them into his home, offering kindness where royalty had offered cruelty. Yet peace is a fragile thing, and power, when threatened, turns venomous. Polydectes, king of Seriphos, desired Danae, not out of love, but out of greed. Perseus stood between him and his obsession. And so the king devised a challenge draped in deceit. He demanded a wedding gift no mortal could return with: the head of Medusa, the Gorgon whose gaze turned men into stone, the journey into the unthinkable. Perseus accepted, not because he was fearless, but because he could not bear to see his mother's freedom strangled by a king's desire. And so began one of the greatest quests in mortal memory. Athena, ever watchful, placed her shield in his hands, a mirror of polished bronze. Hermes gave him a blade, a weapon that hummed with celestial fire. The nymphs gifted him winged sandals and a cloak that folded light itself around him. Armed with divine favor, Perseus flew beyond the edges of known lands, where desert winds carried whispers of nightmares, and the sky bent low with ancient sorrow. There, in a cavern where darkness seemed alive, lay Medusa, not a monster by birth, but a curse born from desecration and divine anger. Perseus did not charge blindly. He moved with silence, with breath held, with mirrored gaze fixed upon Athena's shield. And with a single stroke, swift as prophecy itself, he severed the head of the Gorgon. From Medusa's blood sprang Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysaor, the golden giant, life and death intertwined in one sacred instant. But heroes are not measured only in victories. They are measured in what they cannot ignore. On his journey home, Perseus found Andromeda, chained to the rocks, a living sacrifice to a sea-born terror. The waves rose like mountains. The creature surged from the deep, scales glittering with moonlit fury. But Perseus, rising on winged sandals, brought the terror to its knees, turning it to stone with the severed gaze of Medusa herself. He freed Andromeda, choosing compassion over conquest, love over triumph. Their fates entwined as naturally as night follows dusk. At last, Perseus returned to Seriphos. Polydectes mocked him, until he saw the truth in the hero's eyes. With emotion as calm as the turning of a page, Perseus revealed Medusa's head. The king and his followers became silent statues, eternal, unblinking, powerless. Perseus restored the island to Dictys, returned the divine gifts, and journeyed to Argos, where fate awaited him. At a sporting contest, a discus slipped from Perseus' hand, guided not by clumsiness, but by prophecy. It struck Acrisius, killing him instantly. The prophecy had come full circle. Not through malice, not through vengeance, but through the quiet, inevitable rhythm of destiny. Perseus and Andromeda became the ancestors of great kings, of heroes like Heracles and bloodlines that threaded themselves into every corner of myth. His was a tale not only of divine gifts and monstrous foes, but of a mortal heart that remains steady even as gods and destinies converge upon him. He proved that courage is not the absence of fear, but the strength to walk into fear knowing the world trembles around you. Even as heroes walked among men, Olympus watched with a mixture of pride and unease. The age of gods and golden halls was not eternal. It was a season, brilliant but fleeting. Every triumph of mortals whispered of change. Every victory reminded the immortals that their power was reflected, not absolute. Heracles, mighty beyond measure, carried the weight of both divine and mortal tragedy. 12 labors, each a poem of endurance, etched into his flesh the story of suffering redeemed by courage. The Nemean lion roared, the Hydra writhed, the Stymphalian birds took flight, and yet he moved through them all, not merely as a warrior, but as a mirror of human endurance. Even in Olympus, the gods watched him with envy, admiration, and fear. For no matter how mighty, he was still mortal-born, a bridge between heaven and earth. When his mortal life ended, poisoned by a robe soaked in centaur blood, the gods took him up to the golden halls. Even Hera, relentless in her wrath, softened to accept him. A mortal had become divine, not by birthright, but by the purity of trials endured. And yet Olympus was changing. The gods, once brimming with passion and interference, began to recede from the edges of human affairs. Dionysus wandered the lands with flute and vine, spreading madness and ecstasy alike. Athena's wisdom guided cities, but the streets themselves were now crowded with mortal ambition. The gods' stories were played out not only on Olympus, but through the hands and hearts of men. Beyond the wine-dark seas, Rome stirred, a city that would outgrow Olympus. It did not destroy the old gods. It transformed them. Zeus became Jupiter, Hera became Juno, Poseidon became Neptune. Myth became metaphor. Gods became symbols, and the wild, intimate power of the Olympians was distilled into civic virtue and imperial pageantry. The stories persisted, but the world shifted. Temples remained, but belief waned. The divine flame flickered, threatened not by war, but by the quiet, unstoppable tide of history. Even as the gods receded, fate remained. 3 sisters, unseen yet undeniable, spun the threads of life. Lysis measured, Atropos cut, and Clotho wove destinies that neither king nor god could escape. Prophets and oracles, from Delphi to Dodona, spoke in riddles. Mortals sought their guidance, hoping not to change fate, but to face it with eyes open. And sometimes, the very act of seeing the future became the crucible that forged legend. Beneath the earth, Hades ruled. His realm, silent and impartial, offered no reward, no vengeance. The underworld was not a punishment, but a passage, and his queen, Persephone, became both captive and sovereign, a duality that mirrored the cycles of life and death. Her descent and return, celebrated in the Eleusinian mysteries, taught mortals that renewal comes not from denial, but from acceptance. The age of heroes and gods was not ended in thunder, but in silence. The Olympians withdrew from mortal eyes, leaving temples, altars, and stories behind. Their presence faded, but their echoes remained in literature and art, in the imaginations of generations to come. And in those echoes, mortals learned to see themselves reflected in the divine, not perfect, but flawed, ambitious, heroic, and tragic. The wind shifted over Olympus, not in a roar, not in battle, but as a quiet sigh. Rome was rising, a city of stone, ambition, and law. The gods of Greece, once intimate and passionate, began to feel the pull of time and empire. Jupiter thundered from the Capitoline Hill, not as a wild king of storm and sky, but as a ruler cloaked in law and order. Juno, once Hera, became the vigilant mother of civic virtue. Neptune held dominion over water not merely as god of seas, but as custodian of maritime order. Even Dionysus, wild and unpredictable, was tempered as Bacchus, patron of ritual and pageantry. The old myths were preserved, yet reshaped. Olympus did not fall in war. It evolved. Gods became symbols. Their passions muted, their interference subdued. Men built cities and empires in their image, but the gods now spoke through ritual, morality, and spectacle. Beneath the veneer of public religion, secret rites whispered of power beyond law and empire. The Eleusinian mysteries, the Orphic rites, the cults of Dionysus promised personal encounters with a divine rebirth, transcendence, and communion. In these mysteries, mortals glimpsed eternity not through thunder or conquest, but through ritual, music, and ecstasy. Here, the divine was intimate again, not in thrones of marble, but in hearts and minds. It was subtle, transformative, dangerous, and liberating. At the same time, the age of thought arrived. Philosophers, Stoics, Epicureans, Platonists questioned the literal presence of gods. Reason, ethics, and logos replaced oracular pronouncements. The divine was no longer a figure in the clouds, but a principle of order, reason, and balance. Humanity could glimpse divinity within itself, not merely in Olympus. The old gods, once the arbiters of fate, became mirrors, symbols, and archetypes. Their stories endured, but belief shifted from devotion to reflection. Then came a quiet revolution, faith carried by words, not weapons. Christianity, a singular, unseen God, promised salvation, morality, and unity. It did not fight Zeus in thunder or Athena in wisdom. It simply offered a new order. By the time Theodosius decreed pagan temples closed, the Olympians had already begun to fade from mortal belief. Their altars grew cold, their statues silent. Yet the myths did not vanish. Through Renaissance, Enlightenment, Romanticism, and modernity, they returned, not as gods of thunder and passion, but as symbols of human nature, ambition, hubris, courage, love, and folly. Their stories, though muted in power, grew immortal in imagination. Even as the last torch on Olympus flickered low, the gods whispered in poems, plays, paintings, and tales. The triumphs of Heracles, the cunning of Perseus, the sorrow of Hades and Persephone, the joy and frenzy of Dionysus. They lived on in every human story that dared to ask, what is courage? What is love? What is fate? What is mortality? Olympus may have faded, but the myths endured. And in the echo of every story, the gods walked again. The gods, once silent on their marble thrones, found new stages, not in temples, but in the minds, hearts, and stories of mortals. Time, though relentless, could not erase them. Homer and Hesiod once spoke of their deeds. Centuries later, Shakespeare found in them the raw passions of humanity, pride, jealousy, love, and tragedy. Goethe, Milton, and Dante drew on their archetypes, shaping characters who wrestled with fate, ambition, and divine justice. Modern authors, Joyce, Tolkien, Rick Riordan, reimagined them, breathing new life into Heracles' labors, Perseus' courage, and Dionysus' ecstasy. The gods did not command the world. They guided imagination, showing us that human nature is eternal, complex, and divine in reflection. Painters draped Aphrodite in seashells and golden light. Sculptors carved Athena with spear and shield, poised in contemplation and strategy. Renaissance masters restored the gods to human form. Yet in their hands, faces, and gestures, they captured the essence of possibility, strength, wisdom, and desire. In every brushstroke, the gods were not worshipped, but understood. Their stories became lessons in hubris and heroism, courage and folly, love and vengeance. The flicker of their presence leapt from canvas to silver screen. In epic tales and modern fantasies, gods and heroes walked again. Marvel and DC reimagined Zeus, Thor, and Hercules in armor and spandex. Percy Jackson brought Olympians into school corridors, reminding children that myth lives wherever imagination breathes. The essence of the myths endured: courage, sacrifice, intelligence, and the relentless pull of destiny. Even in worlds of fantasy and fiction, the echoes of Olympus taught timeless truths. Carl Jung saw in the gods the patterns of the human mind, archetypes of instinct, morality, and aspiration. Athena reflected reason and wisdom, Dionysus the chaos and ecstasy within the soul, Hades the inevitability of death. To understand the gods was to understand ourselves, and through them, the eternal struggle of human nature became visible. In every poem, novel, painting, or comic, the gods walked again. Their tales were no longer commands but mirrors. The mortals of ancient Greece may have bowed in temples, yet today we bow only in thought, reflection, and even now, in the quiet of night or the turning of the seasons, the myths murmur. Heracles still labors. Persephone still rises in spring. Dionysus still dances in revelry. Hades still waits in silence, reminding us of mortality and justice. Olympus is no longer a place of thunder or feast. It is a landscape of the mind, a realm of imagination, a testament to the power of story. The gods are alive, not in worship, but in memory, reflection, and the eternal human urge to ask, who are we? What do we fear? What might we become? And in that question, the gods return, always. The torches on Mount Olympus have long since cooled. Marble columns crack, ivy climbs, and the golden thrones are empty. The winds of time sweep through the halls where Zeus once thundered, where Athena once stood poised with spear and shield, where Dionysus danced among revelers. Yet the gods are not gone. They never truly depart. For myth is eternal. It cannot be chained to temples, bound to stone, or silenced by law. It lives in story, in dream, in memory, in the imagination of those who dare to ask the old questions. What is courage? What is justice? What is love? What is fate? Through the centuries, the Olympians have walked quietly among us. In literature, they breathe in verse and prose. In art, they move across canvas and marble, frozen yet alive. In theater, they speak through masks, echoing Dionysian revels. In film and imagination, they fight, love, and rise again. Heracles still carries the weight of impossible labors, a testament to perseverance and human suffering turned into triumph. Persephone still descends into the underworld and returns with spring, reminding us that life and death are entwined, inseparable. Dionysus still leads the dance between ecstasy and madness, revealing the sacred chaos that pulses through the veins of the world. Hades waits in shadow, impartial and eternal, teaching that death is not punishment but passage. Even as gods became symbols, as temples crumbled and sacrifices ceased, the stories endured. Rome adopted the pantheon and reshaped it, yet could not erase the power of myth. The rise of Christianity did not kill the stories. It transformed the stage on which they played. The Renaissance restored them to beauty. Enlightenment philosophers studied them as mirrors of human reason. Romantic poets embraced their tragedy and passion. Modern storytellers reimagined them for new generations. The true immortality of Olympus lies not in thunderbolts or divine blood, but in the human imagination. We keep the gods alive in our hearts because their struggles reflect our own: pride, courage, love, jealousy, wisdom, and folly. In Athena's wisdom, we seek reason. In Apollo's light, we seek understanding. In Aphrodite's passion, we feel the thrill of desire. In Hades' silence, we confront mortality. And so, even without temples or priests, the gods walk with us. In every hero who dares to defy fate, in every mortal who sacrifices for love, in every seeker of truth, their echoes resound. Olympus is not lost. It is eternal, residing in the stories we tell, the dreams we dare, and the imagination that makes us human. The myths whisper still. Listen closely, and you may hear Heracles' footsteps, Persephone's song, Dionysus' laughter. The gods have moved from thrones of marble to the vast palace of the mind, where time cannot touch them, and imagination grants them life forever. The torch of Olympus has passed from stone to story, from altar to page, from temple to thought. And though we may never see Zeus strike the thunderbolt, or watch Athena counsel her warriors, their presence shapes us, guides us, and reminds us. To imagine is to remember. To remember is to honor. And to honor is to live in the light of myth. The winds on Mount Olympus are still. The torches are ash, but the gods remain. Always, waiting quietly for the next story, the next dream, the next human heart brave enough to listen. The wind whispered across the empty marbles of Mount Olympus. Golden thrones sat vacant. Lightning no longer danced at Zeus's command, and Athena's spear rested in eternal stillness. The gods had not vanished. They had merely stepped aside, letting the world turn in their absence. Yet even in silence, their stories lingered, echoing like a chorus of eternity across the lands of men. Below, the rivers flowed as they always had, carrying with them the memories of those who had lived and died. Under divine gaze, heroes and mortals alike had etched their marks upon the world, some through triumph, others through tragedy. Heracles, forever strong, forever mortal-turned-god, watched from the heights of Olympus. His labors now stories whispered in every hall and home. Perseus, ever clever, flew again on Pegasus in the imagination of poets, rescuing Andromeda, slaying monsters, and reminding humanity that courage could defy fate itself. Yet the cycle of life, death, and rebirth continued, as it always had. Persephone rose from the underworld, and with her return, spring stretched across the land. The seasons danced in her footsteps, a reminder that even in loss, there is renewal. Dionysus wandered again among the vineyards, flutes in hand, bringing ecstasy and chaos, reminding men and gods alike that life's beauty is inseparable from its madness. And though Rome had adopted Olympus and later faiths had replaced it, the myths endured. They no longer thundered from marble peaks, nor demanded sacrifices on sacred altars. Their power was subtler now, more enduring, in the art, in the stories, in the whispered dreams of every child, who imagined a hero, a goddess, a world larger than their own. The gods had become eternal, not in worship, but in memory. Time flowed as it always had, relentless and unfeeling. Empires rose and fell. Philosophers argued, poets wept, lovers dreamed, and children laughed in sunlit fields. Yet in every song of triumph, every lament of loss, the old god's presence could be felt. Athena's wisdom guided those who sought justice. Poseidon's wrath trembled beneath storms at sea. Aphrodite stirred hearts in love and longing. And even Hades, silent and immovable, watched the threads of life and death with quiet authority. For humanity had learned something profound. Divinity was not solely the province of gods. It lived in courage, in compassion, in folly, in love, and in defiance of fate itself. Mortals, once puppets of the divine, have become authors of their own stories, weaving heroism and tragedy into the fabric of existence. And in this, the echoes of Olympus found their final triumph. Immortality not in power, but in story. The sun set behind distant hills, spilling gold across the ruins of temples, turning stone to fire, shadow to light. The flame of Olympus flickered one last time in the hearts of those who dared to dream. And though the gods had left their thrones, they had never truly left the world. They walked quietly now in the music of poets, the brushstrokes of painters, the pages of books, and the dreams of dreamers. And somewhere, far beyond the seas and the mountains, the child looked up at the stars and imagined the clash of titans, the wrath of Zeus, the cunning of Athena, the laughter of Dionysus. And in that imagination, the gods were reborn. The wind on Mount Olympus grew colder. The marble torches turned to ash. Yet the myths remained alive, eternal, and waiting. The winds over Mount Olympus had grown still. The torches flickered low, their flames whispering shadows across the marble halls. Yet the stories did not die. They lingered, not in temples or altars, but in the heartbeats of the world, in the quiet spaces between one breath and the next. Zeus no longer thundered from the highest peak. Hera no longer sent her wrath through the lives of mortals. Athena's wisdom no longer guided armies with a clash of bronze. The gods had withdrawn, their presence folded into myth, into whispers, into dreams. Yet the world still remembered. Heracles' labors echoed in the muscles of those who strove against impossible odds. Perseus' courage danced in the shadows of kings and wanderers alike. Dionysus' revelries, once wild and dangerous, now flowed in laughter, in wine, in music that stirred the soul. Pasiphae's descent and return reminded men that life and death were threads of the same tapestry, a cycle of grief, hope, and renewal. The mortals carried the gods forward, unknowingly. They told the tales to children at hearts, to travelers on roads, to poets who dared to dream. The gods were no longer visible, no longer capable of wrath or favor, but they had become something more enduring. They had become memory itself, immortal in imagination. Time moved, empires rose and fell, and new faiths spread across the lands. The voices of Olympus softened into echoes, but they never fully vanished. In the laughter of lovers, the courage of heroes, the sorrow of mothers, the triumph of the clever, the world still carried the rhythm of the divine. And in the quiet moments, when the wind strayed over the hills, when the night sky glittered with stars, one could almost hear the faintest murmur of Olympus. Not a call for worship, not a demand for sacrifice, but a whisper of wonder. Remember, marvel, dream. The gods had left their thrones, yet they had given humanity something far greater than power or dominion. They had given stories. Stories that would endure longer than stone, longer than time, longer than life itself. In that eternal echo, the world understood. The gods may have gone, but their myth, their essence, their lessons, and their magic had not. And so the story of Olympus, of heroes and gods, of love and wrath, of fate and courage, continued evermore, carried in the imagination of mankind. The torches may have cooled, the temples may have crumbled, but the myths of Olympus lived on, luminous and eternal, waiting for each new soul willing to listen. The marble halls of Olympus are silent. The altars are cold. The winds carry only echoes now. Yet somewhere, in the laughter of children, the courage of heroes, the turning of the seasons, the gods still breathe. Not in thunder, not in wrath, but in the stories we tell, in the dreams we dare to dream. Heracles still struggles against impossible odds. Dionysus still dances with abandon. Persephone still rises each spring. And in their memory, Olympus endures, not as a place, but as an idea, eternal and untouchable. So remember, the gods may have left the mountains, but they never truly left the world. They live in every story, every myth, every whisper that dares to reach beyond the mortal veil, and in that timeless echo, your imagination keeps them alive. If their stories inspired you, please like, share, and subscribe.